How can life change in a matter of seconds? This is the question that was in Michael's head when he answered a phone call that would change everything. A doctor who was devoted to his work and respected by his community, Michael was in the middle of a tiring routine at the hospital when his robe vibrated, his mobile phone in his pocket. He could not imagine that this would be the beginning of his biggest nightmare. At the other end of the line, an alarmed voice said, "Your daughter, she had an accident. This is serious. She is being brought here now." For a moment, Michael was paralyzed. The world around him seemed to have stopped, and he heard only the mad beating of his heart. Ashley, his 14-year-old daughter, was his greatest joy. A teenager, full of life, with a smile capable of illuminating any room. And now she was fighting for her life. Without wasting time, Michael rushed to the emergency room. The corridor of the hospital, which he knew so well, never seemed so long to him. When he got to the emergency room, he saw the stretchers that the paramedics were pushing. Ashley was unconscious, pale with noticeable wounds on her face and body. Michael felt a compression in his chest. As a doctor, he had seen such situations countless times, but now everything was different. It was his daughter. "Michael, we will take care of her. Trust us," said his colleague, Dr. Victor, putting his hand on his shoulder. Michael nodded, but in fact he felt helplessness, which he had never experienced before. He perfectly understood what these injuries meant and what their prognosis was. He wanted to intervene, he wanted to save his girl, but he found himself between the roles of a doctor and a father, and as a father he did not know what to do. While the doctors were working, Michael stayed by her side, watching every movement. His mind was torn between shock and memories. He remembered Ashley when she was 8 years old, running in the garden with her hair tied in a pigtail. He remembered the day when she learned to ride a bike with a radiant smile that seemed to challenge the whole world. He remembered the night when she sat next to him and asked him to help her with her studies. Speaking of wanting to become a doctor, like him. And now she was here, fragile and vulnerable, who found herself between life and death. The door in the reception room opened, and Brenda, his wife, came in with tears in her eyes. "What happened, Michael?" "What happened to our girl?" she asked, gasping. Michael hugged her, trying to convey the strength that he himself lacked. "She is in their hands, Brenda. We must believe. It's too late." But in fact, deep in his soul, Michael knew that the fate of Mary depended not only on faith. Every passing second seemed to be eternal, and every moment he asked himself, "Why she? Why this happened to our daughter?" In anticipation, Michael realized that this would be the most difficult moment in his life, not as a doctor, but as a father. The tension in the hospital was palpable. Michael was standing motionless next to Ashley's wheelchair, keeping an eye on his daughter, while the medical monitors issued constant sound signals. He knew what these numbers meant. He knew what each sound signal indicated. But at that moment, it seemed that his mind was unable to perceive reality. Michael's father took the doctor's seat. Ashley was surrounded by a devoted team of doctors. Michael. The surgeons, nurses, and technicians worked tirelessly, trying to recover the damage caused by the accident. Michael wanted to scream, intervene, do something, but he understood that he would only interfere. He felt helpless, a terrible feeling for a person who is used to saving lives. While he watched Ashley fight for her life, flashbacks flashed through his mind. He remembered how she was a little girl, how she ran around the park and laughed, making such a clear sound that it seemed he was illuminating the whole world. He was not sleeping, studying to become the class, and he remembered a few hours before the accident. She said with a confident smile, "This memory is now wounded like a knife in the heart." Brenda, Michael's wife, came to the hospital in a state of despair. She crossed corridors almost stumbling, and when she saw Ashley, her cry was like a scream that echoed throughout the room. Michael hugged her, trying to comfort her, but in fact he was tearing himself apart. The minutes seemed like hours. The doctors were doing everything: compresses, medicines, surgical interventions. But the situation was too critical. Finally, the head of the medical team looked at Michael and Brenda. The expression on his face expressed deep sadness. "Michael," he began carefully, "we did everything we could. The injuries were too serious. It's time for you to say goodbye." This phrase sounded like a direct blow to the chest. Michael felt his legs weakening. Brenda was crying uncontrollably. He walked up to Ashley. The girl was unconscious, but Michael held her tightly in his arms, as if he wanted to give her all the remaining strength. "My girl, you were so brave, so magnificent," he whispered with tears running down his face. "I am sorry that I could not protect you, but wherever you go, know that you will always be my pride." Brenda also came up, holding Ashley in her other hand. The room seemed to freeze in time while the spouses said goodbye to their daughter. Outside, the snow fell quietly, as if the whole world was crying with them. "I love you." The clock on the wall was ticking, but it seemed to Michael and Brenda that this moment would last forever. The pain was unbearable, but the cruel reality was before them. Ashley was no more. The hospital where Michael spent his days saving lives now seemed to be a labyrinth of pain and emptiness. After saying goodbye to Ashley, Michael and Brenda stayed in the room, unable to leave, as if any step toward the door would deprive them of their daughter forever. Brenda sat on a chair, shaking her hands, pressing Ashley's coat to her chest, as if this simple gesture could keep her close. Michael, in turn, walked back and forth, not knowing what to do. The image of Mary on the stretchers was still imprinted in his memory, and he felt that with every second he was losing a part of himself. He looked at Brenda, as desolate as he was, and felt an inescapable guilt. Michael was a doctor, one of the best, but he could not save his own daughter. It was a cruel irony, a burden that, as he knew, he would carry to the end of his days. "Why, Michael?" Brenda finally broke her silence. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Why with our Ashley? She was so young, so full of life." Michael had no answers. He stood on his knees before Brenda, holding her trembling hands. "I don't know, Brenda. I would give everything to exchange places with her." Everything. They hugged, sharing the pain, so deep that it seemed she swallowed everything around her. Snow continued to fall outside the window, concealing the world with a silent white blanket. And inside the hospital, the severity of Ashley's loss seemed unbearable. A few hours passed, and the bureaucratic procedures began. Michael was given documents, medical terms that he knew by heart, but which now seemed cruel and impersonal. He signed papers with trembling hands, with each signature feeling more and more empty. For a person who is used to dealing with death within his profession, this experience was different. It was personal. It was unbearable. Late in the evening, Michael and Brenda left the hospital. He knew it too. The exit was difficult, as if they had left Ashley behind forever. Each step to the door seemed heavier than the previous one. When they finally crossed the threshold, Brenda collapsed on the nearest bench and burst into tears. Michael sat next to her, hugged her by the shoulders, but could not find the strength to say a word. Only Brenda's wheezing and the light movement of the wind, which brings the winter coolness, which brings the winter coolness. While they were sitting, Michael raised his head and saw the hospital lights. The institution he knew well now seemed strange and distant. For the first time, he felt that perhaps he would never be able to become the same doctor, the same person. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a distant sound. He heard faint voices coming from the entrance to the hospital. Two doctors were talking there, and Michael recognized the chief surgeon who was treating Ashley in one of them. Not wanting to do this himself, Michael began to listen. One phrase stood out. The doctor's voice sounded suspicious. From his words, Michael's eyes widened and he froze in place. What did he just hear? Number. The heart was pounding, and for the first time since Ashley left, Michael felt something else. A spark of hope mixed with confusion. Michael sat still, and the voices of the doctors nearby continued to sound. It seemed that every word penetrated directly into his consciousness, echoing an echo that cannot be ignored. You saw the signs. That is why I asked to do a second analysis. You saw the signs, the chief surgeon said in a serious but slightly reassuring tone. Yes, but all this is very subtle, answered another voice in which Michael recognized the senior nurse. If you did not insist on a more detailed check, we would close the case. Michael slowly stood up, as if the primitive instinct controlled his movements. The heart pounded in the chest when he tried to comprehend what he had heard. Signals? A more detailed check? What did they talk about? He went to the side of the voices for a moment, forgetting about the pain that was eating him. Turning around the corner, Michael saw two doctors standing at the entrance to the hospital. They looked at the medical chart, and the expressions of their faces were fluctuating between concentration and concern. Michael cleared his throat, interrupting the conversation. Both doctors were surprised by his appearance. "Dr. Murphy," said the surgeon, feeling embarrassed, "I am very sorry about your loss. We did not know you were still here." Michael ignored the words of consolation. "What did you say about the signs and tests? Is this somehow related to my daughter?" Both doctors exchanged indecisive looks. Finally, the chief surgeon sighed, realizing that he would not be able to get away from the subject. "Michael, we looked through Ashley's tests. We found something that may be important." "How important?" In Michael's voice sounded a mixture of hope and despair. He moved closer, almost grabbing the card from the surgeon's hands. "What did you find out?" "Until we can say anything certain," said the nurse, trying to calm Michael. "But there is a possibility that Ashley showed a minimal reaction to the stimulus, which we checked. She is weak, but enough to make further attempts." For a moment, Michael remained silent. His hands trembled when he held the card, and his eyes quickly ran through the data written in it. He was a doctor. He knew exactly what these numbers meant. A little hope was born inside him, but he tried his best to contain it. He did not want to cling to what could fall apart again. "Why didn't you tell me about it earlier?" Michael asked. His voice was heavy with emotions. "Michael, I deserve the right to know. We wanted to make sure, before giving false hopes," explained the surgeon. "But now we think we should try something else. We are preparing to start an experimental protocol that can give Ashley a chance." The word chance echoed in Michael's head. He felt that tears were rolling down his eyes again. But this time, they were different. It was not the all-consuming despair as before, but a mixture of fear, hope, and determination. "I want to see my daughter now," he said firmly. The surgeon hesitated, but in the end nodded. "Of course, we will take you to her. But Michael, I want you to understand that everything is still unclear. We can't promise anything." "I understand," said Michael, though deep in his soul he clung to this thread of hope with all his might. He followed the doctors back to the hospital, and Brenda, who was still sitting on the bench, looked at him with a mixture of confusion and anticipation. Passing through the corridors, which used to seem cozy to him, Michael felt something different. Perhaps it was not the end. Michael returned to the room where Ashley was lying. The atmosphere seemed the same, but something had changed for him. The small chance that the test gave filled every flashing monitor, every sound, issued by the devices that supported his daughter's life, with a new meaning. Brenda hurried after him, seeing how he entered with the doctors, looked at him confusedly. "Michael, what's going on?" she asked. Her voice was filled with fear and hope. "The doctors have found something," said Michael, holding her hand. "There are signs, Brenda. Small, but they are. We can't give up yet." Brenda pressed her hand to her chest, trying to make sense of these words. For several days, her mind was engulfed by the thought that they would lose Ashley. Now the thought of hope seemed both a relief and a burden. "But what if it doesn't work?" she whispered with tears in her eyes. Michael gently hugged her by the shoulders. "What if it works? We can't stop trying. Not now." The chief surgeon quickly explained to them both the operation plan. "We propose to use an experimental protocol that stimulates the brain of patients in a deep coma." The end. This is a new method, so far without much success, but we have grounds to believe that Ashley will be able to react. "What are the risks?" asked Michael. His facial expression was tense. "The biggest risk is that the protocol will not work and her condition will remain unchanged," said the doctor. "But there is no evidence that this will worsen the condition." Michael looked at Brenda, who had just nodded. They both understood that there was no other way. The end. If they could do anything for Ashley, even a tiny chance, they would do it. The medical team began preparation. Meanwhile, Michael and Brenda stayed next to Ashley, holding her by the hand. Michael spoke to her as he did in difficult moments, as he spoke when she was a very small, frightened girl. "Ashley, we are here with you, my love. You must be strong as always. We believe in you." In the breaks between tears, Brenda remembered one special moment. "Do you remember, Michael, How she fell off the bike and got hurt? She said that she would never ride a bike again, but the next day she tried again. She was always so brave. Michael smiled, although tears flowed like a stream. She is a fighter, and now she will fight too. The time seemed to have elapsed while the medical team was preparing the equipment for the protocol. Michael was watching every movement, unable to sit still. He wanted to help. He wanted to do something. But for the first time, he had to rely on other doctors. It was unpleasant for a person who was used to controlling everything. Finally, the surgeon turned to them. "We are ready to start. Some time will pass before we find out if there are any answers," and Brenda went to the side to make room for the team. But their eyes did not leave Ashley. It was a moment of complete helplessness, and all they could do was wait. When the protocol began, Michael closed his eyes and did what he had not done for many years. He prayed. He asked for a miracle. He asked that his daughter have a second chance. At that moment, time seemed to freeze. It was over, and every second seemed to be eternal. Michael and Brenda could only wait for a sign, at least a sign that there was still hope. The experimental protocol began, and the room plunged into absolute silence, interrupted only by the sounds of the devices controlling Ashley. Michael and Brenda stood at a distance and watched the doctors work. It seemed as if time was dragging on, turning seconds into infinite minutes. The eyes of Michael were fixed to the monitor that showed Ashley's brain activity. It was almost impossible to see any changes in the schedule. But he did not take his eyes off. Each burst seemed like a ray of hope, although it could have been a normal fluctuation. "She will survive, Michael," Brenda asked, holding her husband tightly in her arms. Her voice was almost a whisper. There was a sense of vulnerability that Michael rarely saw in her. "She is strong, Brenda. If there is even a small chance, Ashley will hold on to him." "I know that," said Michael, not taking his eyes off the monitor. The team of doctors worked with precision and caution, correcting the parameters of the protocol and monitoring every detail of Ashley's condition. The chief surgeon turned to the spouses, explaining that the first signs may not appear immediately, but asked them not to lose faith. "These first moments are very important, but the results at first may be barely noticeable. Do not despair." Brenda nodded, but Michael knew that the words of the doctor could not calm his anxiety. He himself felt how, with every moment of invisible progress, a knot in his chest was compressed. Suddenly, one of the monitors made a different sound. It was a barely perceptible sound, but enough to attract the attention of the entire team in the ward. On the chart, we can see a slight fluctuation in Ashley's brain activity, which had never occurred before. "What was it?" Michael immediately asked. His heart was beating wildly. The chief physician approached the monitor and studied the data. "This may be a slight reflex, or it may be a sign of a reaction to a stimulus." Brenda pressed her hands to her mouth, trying to hold back her sobbing. "This is good, isn't it? Does this mean that she is reacting?" "This is just the beginning," said the doctor. "It is too early to draw conclusions, but it is reassuring." Michael felt his heart beating even faster. He took Brenda in his arms and looked at Ashley as if his will could bring her back to life. "Ashley, we are here. Do you hear us? We are with you, child." Silence reigned in the room again. All eyes were fixed on the monitors. The doctors continued to adjust the protocol parameters, trying to stimulate Ashley's reaction even more. Every small surge on the schedule was a wave of hope for Michael and Brenda, who now clung to every tiny sign. No matter how slow and uncertain the progress was, something inside Michael began to change. For the first time in a few days, he felt that there was a real, although fragile, opportunity to return his daughter. He looked at Brenda, who had tears in her eyes, but now they were different. "She is strong, Michael." "Our Ashley is strong," she said. Her voice trembled. "Yes, she is strong," he said convincingly, "and we will be with her to the end." The mood in the room changed. There was no longer an atmosphere of absolute despair in it. Hope appeared, albeit cautious. And for Michael, this was all he needed at the moment. The activity on the monitor began to become more and more constant, forcing everyone in the room to alert. Although it was too early to talk about it, the data showed a slight improvement in Ashley's neurological reactions. Michael felt his heart beating, in which fear and hope were mixed. Michael, is this real? Brenda asked with her eyes wide open, holding her husband tightly in her arms. The chief physician came up to him. It was still very early, but the signs were promising. We need to continue observation and correct the treatment. Michael, with his medical experience, knew that every second mattered. He tried not to rush the event, but could not help but feel a flash of optimism. He held Brenda's hand tightly, as if he wanted to share this fragile hope with her. Ashley was still motionless. Her breathing was controlled by devices, but small muscle reflexes began to appear. Doctors exchanged careful looks, activating their efforts to stabilize her condition. She is a fighter, Michael said. More likely than the rest. She has always been like this. Brenda, wiping her tears, nodded. Do you remember how she fell off her bike for the first time? She was in so much pain, but she insisted on getting up and trying again on the same day. Michael smiled despite the tension. Yes, she never refused anything. Neither the bike nor life. Watching Ashley, the two of them began to remember memorable moments from her childhood. These memories seemed to strengthen their connection with their daughter and support hope. Michael recalled how Ashley loved to draw, filling the house with paper and colored pencils. Brenda talked about the evenings when her daughter insisted that she read them fairy tales. Even when she was exhausted, the conversation interrupted a clear sound on the monitor. The doctors came up to them, studying the data. We have improved motor reflexes, one of the doctors said, looking at Michael. It's not a final result yet, but it's already a step. It's not a final result yet, but it's already a step. Michael felt tears running down his face. He knew it would be a long journey, but this little progress was enough to revive his determination. He approached Ashley, took her by the hand, and quietly said, You did well, my girl. We are here, and we will not go anywhere. Keep fighting. Brenda put her hand on Michael's shoulder, showing that despite all the pain, at that moment they were together. It was a battle that none of them had chosen, but that they would face with all their might. The room became livelier. The doctors continued to correct the procedures, and Michael and Brenda remained by Ashley's side and looked at her as if they could transmit all their energy to their daughter. However, Michael understood that this moment of hope was still surrounded by uncertainty. But for the first time in a few days, he was able to breathe a little deeper, feeling that perhaps life was giving him a chance. The morning light began to penetrate through the windows of the hospital, filling the intensive care room with a soft glow. Michael and Brenda were sitting by Ashley's bed, exhausted but full of hope. The doctors watched every signal with precision, tuning the devices. It was a critical moment. Suddenly, Ashley moved her fingers slightly. Michael froze on the spot, not knowing if he really saw it. Brenda, did you see it? He asked. His voice was filled with emotions. Brenda nodded quickly. Tears flowed down her face. Yes, Michael. She was moving. The doctors, warned by the couple, approached. The monitor showed more stable activity, and Ashley's reflexes began to react more clearly. It seemed that her body was finally fighting for life. The end. Michael clenched his daughter's hand tightly, expecting a new reaction. Ashley, he called out quietly, if you can hear me, move your fingers again. Slowly, almost like a whisper, Ashley's fingers moved. Brenda raised her hands to her face, gasping with excitement. Michael felt his heart pound. For a moment, he forgot that he was a doctor. He forgot about the protocols. He forgot about everything. At that moment, he was just a father. She is reacting, one of the doctors said. This is a significant progress, but we still have to be careful. Michael could not contain his happiness. He leaned over to Ashley, gently hugging her face. We are here, my girl. You are coming back to us. The next few days were a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Ashley began to show signs of recovery, although slowly. The doctors explained that the process would be long, but Michael and Brenda were ready to take any tests just to get their daughter back. One day, asleep next to the bed, Michael felt pressure on his arm. It was Ashley. Her eyes were open and looked at him. Dad, she whispered in a weak voice. Michael immediately woke up. His heart was barely torn from excitement. Ashley? Ashley, my dear, called Brenda, who ran into the room. The joy was so great that the three of them cried while the doctors confirmed that Ashley was not in danger. Over the next few weeks, Ashley's condition continued to improve. Every small step forward was marked as a victory. The experience brought the family even closer, strengthening the love and gratitude they felt for each other. The night when Mary was finally discharged, Michael and Brenda took her home, where a small celebration awaited them. Friends and relatives gathered here, who supported them during the difficult trials. Mary, who had not yet come to her senses, smiled at the sight of so many people who loved her. Michael, holding a glass in his hands, made a toast. A toast. This year we received the greatest gift, the life of our daughter. We will never be able to fully express our gratitude, but we learned that love and hope can overcome even the darkest moments. When the hall was filled with applause, Ashley looked at her parents and smiled. She knew that it was not an easy struggle, but it was worth it. But thanks to their support, it was ready to start all over again. Do you like this story? We really want to know what you think. Therefore, leave your comment below. If you have not subscribed yet, take this opportunity to subscribe to the channel and become part of this incredible community. And do not forget to read other materials that we have prepared with love for you. See you in the next video.